And by the way, when you at 5'6", when you said everything's bigger in Texas, everything's bigger in Texas but me.
Well, you do look good. I haven't seen you in it's been about 10 years since I've seen you. So it's good to see you, and it's good to be back here in Texas. You know, I teed that up as a conversation around the financial services industry and, you know, interchange and electronic payment systems and things like that. But maybe want to take a step back for a second and just talk about the kind of macro landscape of financial services. And as we've talked about, and as Scott just touched on, 2025 is a year full of shifts and and developments both domestically and internationally. The Trump administration has made changes to trade, taxes, deregulation, and while the global dynamics continue to change, how do you think and how would you advise state lawmakers to adapt to remain competitive and resilient through this constantly changing landscape?
Well, one, if I could, before answering the question, I just want to say, you know, we all say we're honored to be somewhere. I'm really honored to be here. I didn't come to Congress through a state legislature, but I've been a huge admirer of ALEC. And when I look at how little good is coming out of the U.S. Capitol today, and how much good, be it tort reform, educational choice, coming out of the states, when I think about how these ideas are so often incubated, curated at ALEC, let me just say you give me a lot of hope, so thank you very much. So I would say, Lisa, we are on the precipice of some really dramatic changes in the financial services arena. But first, I would say, if you don't realize it, you should. The number one economic sector in America is financial services. It's about 22, 23% of GDP. It is also our number one export. And we are a net exporter of services in the U.S. So it's a very, very important industry. And then at the end of the day, you can't have capitalism without capital. And so our ability to have the deepest, most liquid financial markets to fuel kind of this engine of entrepreneurship and wealth formation and economic prosperity is so critical. But why I say we're on the precipice of great change is really because of blockchain and artificial intelligence, subjects we talk about and we know absolutely nothing of. So I will continue to talk about them as well. But the ability of having financial transactions that essentially can settle and clear immediately, going to 24/7 trading, the tokenization of all assets, and kind of the leading edge of that is stable coins, wallet-to-wallet payment systems. I think artificial intelligence is going to increasingly be a key component of underwriting, and it's going to be important as legislators to ensure that this new technology is not kind of smothered in the cradle. And at the same time, that government doesn't pick winners and losers among the various emerging technologies. And I would also say that it is so critical, and the Trump administration realizes this, that we should be the leader in America in kind of this whole digital asset infrastructure in formation, because it's just incredibly important that the world rely upon U.S. financial services, that the U.S. dollar continues to be the world's reserve currency. Our military power is based upon our economic power. Our economic power is based upon the health of our financial markets. And so it's not just our economic power, military power, it's really our moral authority too, and it all comes back to the financial market. So it's a very exciting time to be involved in financial services. And like most matters, I hope our legislatures will govern wisely and sparingly.
Yeah, you're talking about entrepreneurship and kind of disruption in the system. We just gave out the prize for this new startup for venture philanthropy and making sure that we're creating new organizations, and it comes down to that kind of government regulation and stifling that growth. When you think about the agencies and how they often create barriers and stifle that growth, how would agencies reassess their regulations in these coming years so they can support that economic growth, improve access to funding, and then strengthen the banking system itself?
Well, I wouldn't hold my breath on having agencies reform themselves. I don't know what the experience is in your state, but in Washington, I never met a bureaucrat who didn't want more money, more power, and less oversight. So I think it's really the responsibility of many in this room today to ensure accountability to we the people. So I got to tell you, one of the great challenges and threats I see in our nation is kind of the rise of the administrative state. If you want to talk about a threat to democracy, it's how much power is wielded by those who are never elected by we the people. But when you ask about what do we expect our administrative agencies to do, one, there has to be an appreciation, and particularly when I think about the Ukraine-Russian war, I think this was a Stalin quote, quantity has its own quality. And so sometimes just the sheer volume and regulatory access just puts such a weight and burden on the economy. And that's why I really salute the Trump administration. If I have this right, in Trump 1.0, it was for every agency, if you want to create a new regulation, you got to get rid of 2. I think now it's 10 to 1.
And I think they beat their own goals, too, 12 to 1.
Well, and not only that, Lisa, I think they have to reduce the net regulatory cost as affirmed by the Office of Management and Budget. So this is a huge economic tailwind. We won't talk about the economic headwinds of trade, and we'll put that to the side for the moment. So number one, watch out for the sheer volume. Second of all, we need, critical to economic prosperity is the rule of law, and it gets back to how much discretion. I mean, when the success of your business enterprise is more dependent upon what side of the bed your regulator wakes up on versus how hard your workforce works, the genius of your particular product or service, then we have a real problem in America. So it's the volume, it's the cost, it's the clarity of the regulations that count as well. But I think to a great extent there just has to be so much more oversight of the legislative branch in our state houses in Congress, because we have way too many bureaucrats that are running amok.
Yeah, it's such a challenge to work through. So as switching gears a little bit, as legislators look to address affordability challenges, that's something that Scott mentioned. We've been talking about it all morning. How can state leaders ensure that policy solutions protect consumers and proposals such as rate caps and make sure that they don't restrict that access? So, and I think we have a model policy that's going to be discussed in one of the task forces later this afternoon on rate caps and making sure that we're protecting and not exposing those.
Well, rate caps are a uniquely bad idea. I don't know why any conservative would ever support price controls, and that's not about orthodoxy, it's about empiricism. And we've had about 2,000 years of history with price controls. And in the U.S., I can barely see through the lights, but I know there's some other gray hairs out there. May remember when we had price controls on gasoline in the 70s? Yes. I clearly remember finally getting my driver's license. That was the good news, and then there was no gasoline that I was allowed to buy. Recently, I've been reading a book by my mentor, Senator Phil Gramm, and going through kind of some of the myths of capitalism. And there was a reminder about the implicit and explicit price controls that exacerbated the Great Depression, and when they literally were dumping milk into the streets and shooting cattle herds and trying to support farmers. Meanwhile, people were going hungry. And then because you couldn't lower wages, you have these huge ranks of the unemployed. And hearkening back to the 70s, we used to have a highly regulated telephone with price controls, airlines, natural gas. Guess what? We deregulate them all, and all of a sudden, look around, we have competition, prices come down, we have innovation. And it just reminds me of kind of the great Austrian economist, Friedrich Hayek. It's his concept of fatal conceit. And we, as legislators, should never have the fatal conceit that we know better than millions of free Americans making decisions with their own money what a price of a good or service can be. And at the end of the day, if you're going to impose rate caps, price controls, again, it's not orthodoxy, it's empiricism, it's history. And regrettably, perhaps the only lesson of history is that we don't learn the lessons of history. But the lesson of history is you're going to end up with shortages.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Price controls don't work, right? And as you talk about interest rate caps and things like that, we've also seen a number of proposals, both at the state level and at the federal level. One I know you're very familiar with, which is the Durbin Bill, back 10, 15 years ago.
Thanks for the PTSD.
Well, I'm going to bring it right back. That seems to be a lingering issue. These price controls on interchange fees. Can you explain to the audience what interchange is? I know you kind of lived through it, but we've seen this.
Regrettably, well, one, it was part of the Dodd-Frank law, which, if you're familiar with that, one of the worst pieces of legislation ever contrived by the mind of man. And this was a provision that was airdropped into the conference committee, not in the House bill, not in the Senate bill. And so what it did was it did two things. It put price caps on what are known as interchange fees, fees that are collected really by the credit card companies that bank issuers use for, among other things, rewards programs and fraud detection and the security of the payment rail system. This was done on debit cards. And once it was done, lo and behold, you poke in on one side of the balloon, it pokes out somewhere else. Debit card rewards programs went practically to zero. And the banks who were denied this stream of income, all of a sudden we saw a huge contraction in free checking. And so, you know, bad ideas don't go away, they just get recycled. And so now there's an idea in Washington to apply this to credit cards. And so once again, reward programs will go away, free checking will get even more contracted, credit card fees will go up. I don't, again, know why a conservative would want to engage in this. And I'd also point out, Lisa, that with the emerging technologies, this whole interchange debate, it may be moot in 5, 7 to 10 years. You look at Stripe, and you look at PayPal, and you look at Apple Pay, and you look at kind of these wallet-to-wallet payment systems. I'm not saying it'll ever go away. But again, why do you want to be involved in price controls that are going to lead to shortages? And by the way, politically, this is kind of the big banks against the big retailers. When I was in Congress, I thought, why do I want to get in the middle of Clash of the Titans? So that's the politics, but the principle is so much more important. And that is, you are taking power away from the people to make economic decisions on their own.
Yeah, Yeah, that's that purchasing power. You think that customers can make that decision. In my mind, you know, when you say it's the big banks versus the big retailers, that's exactly right. They should work that out in the business room or
Well,
the
and they
boardrooms.
have. They've been suing each other for 20 years. But
Well, and I think that there was some news on a settlement just recently. Have you been keeping up on the settlements?
well, there was a settlement recently, which again goes to show that quite often market participants can work out these matters among themselves. I mean, clearly the retailers don't like having to pay these fees. The banks want the income stream, and so there's negotiation between the parties. And yes, there was a big settlement reached. I don't frankly know the details. And again, I don't think it was ever my job as chairman of the House Financial Services Committee to dictate a business model, but to allow the parties to negotiate this among themselves, and I think to a great extent we've seen that.
Yeah, I think you said it right. Why would a conservative ever think that price controls or intervening in a business-to-business decision would make sense? So, well, we thank you very much for your thoughts and appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Happy to be here. Happy to.